This boy and girl coming home from school look quite content with life. And why not? They're looking forward to an important date, dinner at home with the family. What's the matter? Doesn't that sound exciting to you?
I guess.
Well, to them it's a special occasion,
Okay.
as it has been ever since they sat down to dinner in high chairs. First of all, daughter has changed from school clothes to something more festive. Dressing a little makes her feel and consequently look more charming.
Charming for who? The dad?
Takes on a special air. Mother, too, changes from her daytime clothes.
That woman has never had an orgasm
The
in her
women
life.
of this family seem to feel that they owe it to the men of the family to look relaxed, rested, and attractive at dinner time.
I hate this.
Father, too, looks forward to this date with the family. He has had a hard day at the office, and in his
Yeah,
briefcase
better go
are
flick
some
the bean, 'cause
contracts
he's not
which
gonna
must
do it
be
for
looked
you.
over tonight. But in the meantime, he will relax at dinner with those he loves. These boys greet their dad as though they are genuinely glad to see him, as though they had really missed
man is an
being away
alcoholic,
from him
okay.
during the day and are anxious to talk to him. And this is no time to dun father for a raise in your allowance.
This could just as
Impose
easily be a
or
conversation
argue
between the
about
mom and
other
the
financial
dad,
matters.
asking, please, sir, can I have more allowance?
Ah, dinner time. Napkins on the lap, the family awaits service. They converse pleasantly while Dad serves. Father serves Mother first,
Oh my god, so kind of
then
you.
Daughter. Then the boys. Don't worry, fellas, you won't get left. Tell Mother how good the food is. Maybe Sis rates a compliment, too.
There's
It
no
makes
way.
them want to continue pleasing you.
There's no way, because no one's pleasing them.
Now we're ready for dessert. Most families don't have maids, so Mother needs help with the serving from the kitchen. Son says Mother has done enough. Watch him play butler. Do you begin to see now how a date with your family can be a truly special occasion? There is no family so poor but that the evening meal can be eaten in an atmosphere of warmth and gentleness.
I don't know what in the 1950s propaganda that was, but I'm going to tell you right off the bat, Mother is having an affair with Neighbor, and rightfully so. So this mind-numbing propaganda from the 1950s that we just saw is, God, where do I even begin? Let me begin with this. What do you think is the root of the word family? Where do you think that word came from? A happy group of people who share the same blood? No, if you think that, you are wrong. The word family comes from the Latin word famulus, which means domestic slave or servant. And the term nuclear family originated in the 1940s by an anthropologist called George Murdoch. As a rule of thumb, anything that comes out of the 1940s, especially made by a man, I don't trust it. I don't trust it. And he chose the word nuclear from the word nucleus, meaning core, right? The nucleus is the core of the cell. Not to be confused with the mitochondria, which is the powerhouse of the cell. And the family is the nucleus because it's the central unit around which other social institutions are organized. I like to think of the word nuclear in the context of the nuclear family as nuclear waste because it lasts so long. But this dude, he saw the nuclear family as the only family unit that could fulfill 4 functions. And those 4 functions are, number 1, the sexual function, which, self-explanatory. It's basically just 2 people fucking. Because sexual activity needs to be regulated in a well-functioning society. There needs to be monogamy and same-sex relations, which tells me that this guy was probably a hoe and he may have been closeted. The second function was the reproductive function. Obviously, that's very self-explanatory. The third function is the economic function, which is to make sure that everybody has the necessities of life, and that people's roles are basically assigned to what they do best, right? Because women are nurturing, they have to be the caregivers, and they're relegated to the domestic realm. And if you remember what I talked about last episode, this division of labor and assigning roles to people is back. And the fourth function was the educational function, which is basically socializing kids to be well-functioning members of societies, or high-functioning alcoholics, like father. And George Murdoch, no, this is the real Murdoch mystery, because how are people buying this propaganda? But George Murdoch was so adamant. He's like, this is the best and the only type of family that can fulfill all these four functions. There is no other family unit that can do anything that comes close to this, and that is it. Point blank, period. Number one, the best. Okay, episode is over. Shout out to all the Patreon baddies. No, I'm just kidding. Listen, if these functions sounded familiar, if they reminded you of what I was talking about in the last episode about how patriarchy, as it originated from the state, required men to fulfill a certain function and women to fulfill a certain function, if this reminds you of that, then you are onto something. Because we can trace the origins of patriarchy back to the clearly defined roles that men and women needed to have. But in this case, instead of being in servitude to the state or to agriculture, you're in servitude to capitalism. Yeah, capitalism has now entered the chat, because we cannot talk about patriarchy without talking about capitalism. Now, I want you to remember this magic formula in your mind, because we're going to dissect this. The way that society has been set up until very recently was that women submit to men, men submit to capitalism, and capitalism submits to patriarchy. And this formula exists in a feedback loop. What the family does, the nuclear family in particular, is that it entrenches the first part of this formula, where women submit to men. And it does this through the division of labor. Now, the division of labor is not inherently bad, because it just makes sense for people to do what they're best at. That's the most efficient and fulfilling way of doing most things. But the nuclear family originated with an agenda. And that agenda was to, like I said, have women submit to men. Because you have to think about it like this. The family is a private form of government. It has its own way of functioning. It has its own dynamics and customs and things that are acceptable versus aren't acceptable. It has its own code of conduct, and it has its own division of labor. People are assigned certain tasks in order to fulfill a certain function. Think about your family growing up, or even your family right now, if you're a parent or a spouse or what have you. I'm willing to bet that each person in that household has a specific set of responsibilities. If you had a say in the responsibilities that you got, then the dynamic is probably favorable. But the problem is that with the nuclear family, nobody really got a say in what their role was, especially women. the nuclear family didn't just originate in the 1950s or with the Industrial Revolution in the late 18th and early 19th century. No. There's actually evidence that traces the nuclear family back about 4,600 years. Now, the nuclear family was not the dominant type of family unit until the Industrial Revolution. And that's when it spread through Europe and North America. But for most of human history, humans lived in larger kinship groups. We lived with extended family, we lived with the community that we were a part of, and the division of labor looked a lot different, especially with raising children, which was one of the biggest responsibilities at that time. The responsibility of raising a child did not just fall on the child's biological mother. It was a shared responsibility among women in that community or in that family. So the aunties, the grandmas, the other women, the sisters, they would help raise children communally. Because that is still one of the biggest responsibilities that people face today. Except before the nuclear family, there was a village. And that's really important to note, because when you hear these buffoons all the time saying things like, oh, but there's no women painters, or there's no women scientists, or women playwrights, or blah, 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 blah. And they want to point out how all the great literary minds and the great researchers and all these people who we know of, like Michelangelo or Shakespeare or whatever, all these people are men. Well, I'm so sorry, Chad. If women were forced to do something on their own that they were previously doing as a group, what do you think is going to happen, you stupid idiot? Huh? So relegating women to the home and making them the sole domestic servant is one of the biggest ways that the patriarchy has been able to survive and entrench itself in the fabric of our lives. Because chances are, you grew up in a nuclear family. I did. I grew up in a nuclear family. Everybody in my family grew up in a nuclear family and now has their own nuclear family. So the nuclear family made women the domestic servant. The nuclear family is inherently a patriarchal family. It's a dictatorship inside the home. Now, of course, those dynamics look differently for a lot of families today, because father is not the sole breadwinner and mother is not the sole person who takes care of the home. Those responsibilities are now shared. But the truth of the matter is still that it is still a patriarchal structure of family. Because now that women have the ability to go out and get a job, that doesn't mean that their responsibility to be a mother and to be the primary caretaker of the child has gone away. So now we're in this situation of damned if you do, damned if you don't. You can be a working mom, but now you have 2 jobs. Actually, you probably have 3 jobs. The nuclear family was designed based on zero-sum logic. One person wins if another person loses. So women can go to work, great. Women can be working moms, great. You're still going to face backlash for it. You're still going to face pressure for it, because, and especially with the shrinking role of the state and crappy childcare in a lot of parts of the world, a lot of women are still completely and utterly alone. One of the reasons I never want to have kids is because I don't want that life for myself. Because the structure of the nuclear family is still there, right? You are still, the woman is still expected to have these domestic duties. Obviously, if you ask me, I don't cook, I don't clean. Actually, I do my meal prep and I'm always cleaning my space. But for a man, never. For a man, never. But that's the thing, you have to add members to your family. If you can afford it, you get a nanny, you get a housekeeper, you get people whose job it is to take on those responsibilities. Because we're still faced, as women, we're still faced with this impossible task of doing everything ourselves. And there's still stigma associated with getting help, getting a nanny, getting a caregiver, getting a housekeeper. In a lot of societies, that's seen as a failure on the part of the woman, for a middle-class woman. And that's another element of the nuclear family, which is that it punishes everyone. It punishes the husband because with the traditional model of the nuclear family, the sole breadwinner was the only person who would be able to provide for the family. So if father got injured or was incapacitated in some sort of way and couldn't work for whatever reason, then tough luck. You'd have to rely on the state. Mother is punished because her role is to just stay at home, pop out babies, and take care of the house. Like, I can't think of any, like, that is my biggest nightmare. And even children are punished. If a child is born out of wedlock, they're a bastard. And that goes back to the control exerted over women's reproduction. And the fact that men wanted to pass down property and inheritance to their sons and to their quote-unquote legitimate heirs. And instead of not sticking their dick into anything with a pulse, they decided to control the women. So even a child who did not ask to be born, who wasn't even responsible for the parents clapping cheeks to begin with, is now punished, is excluded from the inheritance, is called a bastard, is looked down on as some kind of social deviant. Because underlying all of this is the formula that women submit to men submit to capitalism, and capitalism submits to patriarchy. I'm going to read a passage from The Origin of the Family, Private Property, and the State, which was written by Friedrich Engels, who was a German philosopher and buddies with Karl Marx. Okay, wait, smash or pass Friedrich Engels? He has a lot of facial hair. He has a really big beard, so I would say smash if he trimmed his beard a little bit. And smash or pass Karl Marx? I don't know. I would say pass. He's got a lot of hair on his head and on his beard. It seems like you're going to be like pulling hair out of different crevices for days on end. So yeah, smash Friedrich Engels, pass on Karl Marx. But to be honest, Karl Marx can kind of get it too if he just groomed himself. Okay, so what was the passage I was going to read? Oh yeah. The first division of labor is that between the man and woman for child breeding. And today I can add, the first class antagonism which appears in history coincides with the development of the antagonism between man and woman and monogamous marriage, and the first class oppression with that of the female sex by the male. Some dude from the 1800s wrote this. Oh my god, if this guy was reincarnated, it would be on sight. A few pages later, he says, the equality of the two, man and woman, changed with the patriarchal family, and even more with the what the hell is this word? The monogamous. I'm going to call it the monogamous individual family. The administration of the household lost its public character. It was no longer the concern of society. It became a private service. The wife became the first domestic servant, pushed out of participation in social production. A little bit further down, he says, when she fulfills her duties in the private service of her family, she remains excluded from public production and cannot earn anything. And when she wishes to take part in public industry and earn her living independently, she is not in a position to fulfill her family duties. The modern individual family is based on the open or disguised domestic enslavement of the woman, and modern society is a mass composed solely of individual families as its molecules. Whew, okay. So this is literally, we're talking about the same thing. Me and Freddie were on the same page, okay? Because the woman, damned if you do, damned if you don't. Fool me once, shame on you. You fool me, can't get fooled again. And this is exactly how the nuclear family, or the patriarchal family, which he calls it at the time, because the term nuclear family, like I said, originated in the 1940s. The nuclear family serves the function of the magic formula. Women submit to men submit to capitalism, capitalism submits to patriarchy. So the nuclear family, to be confused with the patriarchal family, because patriarchy is embedded in the DNA of the nuclear family, it serves to keep women subservient. Even today. Because remember what I said earlier, or was it in the last episode? I can't remember now. If patriarchy is the organism, the nuclear family is the cell. And marriage is the nucleus. Women's domestication and their role as the first domestic servant, like Freddie says, has a dual function. The first function is the disenfranchisement of women, because you're excluded from the public realm. You can't organize, you can't get an education, you can't go out and develop any skills outside of the homemaking and childbearing skills. And so you're only as good as your domestic, the outcome of your domestic responsibilities. You can't organize and spread information, right? When women do that, what is it called? It's called gossip. And you have no means of escape because you don't have any financial independence. And in a capitalist society where money is what gets you anything, you're missing the most basic prerequisite to freedom. So that's the first function of women within a nuclear family. The second function is to enable men to be of service to capitalism. Because every act of paid labor depends on its unseen inverse, which is unpaid labor. If you're going to go to work, there are a lot of tasks that you still need to do that are unpaid, but that you rely on to keep your life in check. You still got to do your laundry. You still have to cook and clean for yourself. You still have to maintain the home that you live in. And so by having that domestic servant, which is your wife, oh my God, the Borat voice just came into my head. My wife. I'm making sexy time with my wife. There was no sexy time back then. Let's be real. That woman we saw in the opening video has never had an orgasm in her life. What was I saying? Oh yeah. So when men have that domestic servant, then they're able to fulfill their function to capitalism. They're able to go to work. They're able to work long hours because the kids are taken care of. Dinner is already prepared. The house is in order. And so they are able to be of maximum function to capitalism through their labor and their time. In effect, men under this formula basically act as the middleman between women and capitalism. Because the man is the one who's directly engaging with capitalism because he produces paid labor and his labor is productive, quote unquote, because it produces capital. And if you think about it a little bit critically, you realize that, well, if you exclude women from the workforce, then you're only using about half of the productive capacity of society. If you enabled women to go to work, they can be of service to capitalism too. And with the second wave of feminism, where women were able to go to work, that's exactly what happened. Women were now able to be productive to capitalism. And the formula changed. Instead of women submitting to men submitting to capitalism, and capitalism submitting to patriarchy, now women are able to submit to capitalism directly. Because for the first time in history, starting in the mid-1900s, for the first time in history, it's gonna start raining men. That's actually my biggest nightmare, if it ever rained men, But for the first time in history, women were no longer dependent on men. Because the byproduct of feminism and of women being able to go to work was that, in a sense, men became expendable and obsolete. And that formula started to break down because most men, average, middle, or lower class men, they would only get their patriarchal dividends as long as I'll tell you next time. Don't forget that you are the baddest bitch in any building that you step foot in. Until next time, stay bad. Love you. Bye. And shout out to all the baddies on Patreon. Shout out to Adriana, Mina, Gemma, Priya, Katya, Irene, Naomi, Nilufa, Adelaide, Nadia, Faith, Amy, Simran, Melinda, Sophia M, Sophia K, Jada, Yael, Amara, Kat, and Jin. Thank you all so much for your support.